Hello and welcome to Lesson 7 of Dark Hole Elementary, Hardleg Gaming's beginner guide on how to play the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. I'm Hardleg Joe, and in this lesson I'll be talking about how to properly chain effects together. As you know from previous lessons, nearly every action taken in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is followed by a short pause to allow your opponent a chance to respond. Oftentimes, when they do respond, it creates what is called a chain. In Yu-Gi-Oh! A chain is a group of effects which have been activated in response to one another, or activated at the same time. Most of the time, chains are simple and pretty easy to understand. If, for instance, your opponent activates a normal spell card, and you respond by activating a trap that negates that spell card, then you've just created a simple chain. In cases like that, it's not too difficult to understand the outcome of the chain, and oftentimes, chaining is pretty self-explanatory. However, complex multi-card chains do come up from time to time, and they are not always so easy to understand. In order to keep complex chains organized, each effect in a chain is given a number, called a chain link. The first effect activated is chain link 1, and anything that responds to it becomes chain link 2. If a third effect is activated, it'll become chain link 3, followed by chain link 4, and so on until the players stop activating effects. Once the players are done building the chain, it must then be resolved to continue. To resolve a chain means to figure out the final outcome of all the effects and then apply them. This is done by starting at the highest number chain link and moving backwards until you get back to chain link 1. In my first example, resolving the chain is easy. Your opponent's spell card is chain link 1, and your trap is chain link 2. Since your trap is the highest link, its effect goes off first, negating your opponent's spell before it can go into effect. You then move to chain link 1, but since the spell was negated, it simply goes to the graveyard without applying its effect. At this point, the chain is resolved, and play can continue as usual. Where chains get confusing is the concept of cost and how it relates to effect. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, a cost is something you must do in order to activate a card or effect, usually denoted in the text box by a semicolon. Most of the time, paying a cost involves losing something, such as paying life points, discarding cards, or tributing monsters. For instance, the spell Dark Core says, discard one card, then target one face-up monster on the field. Banish that target. In this case, discarding a card is the cost you pay in order to gain the effect of banishing one monster. What makes this concept confusing with chains is that you pay the cost of your cards when you activate them, but you only apply the effects when they resolve. So let's say you play Dark Core. As soon as you play it, you must discard a card as the cost. After that, your opponent has a chance to respond. If they respond by negating your spell, then you don't get the cost you paid back. The cost is separate from the effect and is paid as soon as the card is activated, regardless of if its effect actually goes through. Now that you understand cost, let's look at a more complex example of a chain. Let's say you play Dark Hole, which says destroy all monsters on the field. Your opponent has two monsters. One of them is a normal monster, but the other is Evalzar Lagia. This monster has a complex effect, but basically it can negate the activation of a spell card by detaching to Xyz material, which it does in response to Dark Hole. To stop it from negating, you chain the trap card Fiendish Chain, which says, activate this card by targeting one effect monster on the field. Its effects are negated. Your opponent, however, responds by chaining the trap card Spiritual Fire Art Kurenai, which states, tribute one fire monster. Inflict damage to your opponent equal to that original monster's attack. Because tributing a monster is the cost, your opponent tributes Evalzar Lagia, sending it to the graveyard. At this point, neither of you have any more cards you wish to activate, so the chain ends and must be resolved. In this situation, Dark Hole is chain link 1, Evalzar Lagia is chain link 2, Fiendish Chain is chain link 3, and Spiritual Fire Art is chain link 4. When resolving a chain, you start with the highest link and work backwards, so Spiritual Fire Art activates first. Lagia has been sent to the graveyard as the cost, so the effect activates, inflicting Lagia's 2400 attack to you as damage. Next you move down to chain link 3, Fiendish Chain. This card, however, no longer works. Since you targeted Lagia when you activated it, and Lagia is no longer on the field, the effect can't resolve properly, and when that happens, the card fails to function. This brings us to Chain Link 2, Logia. Even though Logia is no longer on the field, his effect was already activated, and the cost was already paid. Since Fiendish Chain couldn't target him in Chain Link 3, his effect was never negated, and therefore goes off as planned, negating Dark Hole. This finally brings us back to Chain Link 1. Since Dark Hole was negated, it has no effect, thus saving your opponent's other monster from destruction. In addition to showing how complex chaining can make for interesting and strategic plays, this example also highlights an interesting point that often confuses newer players: the idea that a card's effect is not directly linked to that card being on a field. Just because a card is destroyed does not mean its effect is negated. Negated and destroyed are two different things. Once an effect is activated, unless it is specifically negated by another effect, or the effect is no longer possible because of some change on the field, then the effect resolves even if the card is destroyed. This same principle is used in more simple instances to chain traps which would otherwise be destroyed. As a final example of chaining, let's look at one more simple chain. Let's say it's your opponent's turn. On your previous turn, you had set the trap card Threatening Roar, which states, your opponent cannot declare an attack this turn. Your opponent has Mystical Space Typhoon, which says, target one spell trap card on the field, destroy that target. In this instance, Mystical Space Typhoon is of no use to your opponent, because it does not negate, and Threatening Roar has no target or activation requirements it can miss. So either your opponent uses their spell first, and you chain Threatening Roar's Chain Link 2, or you activate Threatening Roar first, and your opponent foolishly chains Mystical Space Typhoon, thinking it will stop your trap by destroying it. Regardless of the case, Threatening Roar has been activated on a chain, and not negated, so its effect will go off, preventing your opponent from attacking this turn. Now that you understand the finer points of how to build and resolve chains, all that remains is to explain spell speed. Not all effects are equal. Every spell, trap, and monster effect has a spell speed of either 1, 2, or 3, which determines in what situations it can be chained. Most spells and monster effects have a spell speed of 1. Spell speed 1 is the lowest speed. These effects cannot be activated in response to other effects, and they are almost never higher than Chain Link 1. Trap cards and effects with Quick in the name, like Quick Play spell cards and Monster Quick effects, are spell speed 2. These effects can be used in response to any effect of its spell speed or lower, meaning they can be chained to anything as long as it isn't spell speed 3. Counter traps are the only cards with a spell speed of 3, and they are the end-all for chains. The only thing that can chain to a counter trap is another counter trap. To see how spell speed applies in action, let's look at my previous example with the Valzar Logia again. Let's say that instead of having the continuous trap card Fiendish Chain, you instead had the counter trap Divine Wrath, which negates the activation of an effect monster's effect and destroys it. Since Divine Wrath is a counter trap and has a spell speed of 3, your opponent could not chain Spiritual Fire Art to it, because it is a normal trap and thus only spell speed 2. In this case, your opponent would not be able to save their monster, and Divine Wrath would negate Logia, allowing Dark Hole to resolve as planned, destroying your opponent's other monster as well. As a final note, I should mention that not all actions start chains, only spells, traps, and monster effects. Summoning a monster, attacking, and changing battle position do not start chains and are not actions that can be chained to. This is important to note because there are many traps and effects that activate when a monster attacks or when a monster is summoned, and resolving these types of effects is not the same as resolving a chain. In most cases, simply following the card text should be enough to get you by, though there are some times when it may get confusing. That, however, is a topic for another video. For now, you should have more than enough knowledge to begin playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Thank you for taking the time to watch Dark Hole Elementary. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video series, and if you're interested in learning more about Yu-Gi-Oh!, be sure to check out my other two series. Skill Drain High, where I'll be taking a more complex look at the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! And covering topics you won't find in the basic rulebook, and Upstart Goblin University, where I'll be taking a more personal approach, teaching deck building, duel theory, and looking at unofficial terms that have made their way into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Vernacular. Until then, have fun and enjoy dueling.